Okay, welcome to a video on some recent wind tunnel testing I did up at Silverstone. If you're new around here and this is one of the first videos you have watched on my channel and you get some value from it, please consider hitting that subscribe button down below. I'm gonna run through what I tested, what the point of testing was, and then ultimately wrap up with some of the conclusions and takeaways from doing the testing. I am also gonna share on screen some of the data and actually talk about how many watts I did, or in some cases didn't save from the various things that I tested. Hopefully some of it is useful for yourselves and potentially quite insightful in the sense that some of the gains that people claim to make from going into the wind tunnel are pretty wild. So first thing to point out is that I paid for the wind tunnel with my own money. I've gone in the wind tunnel with Philip from Try Training Harder. I had a 2-hour slot on a Wednesday evening. I managed to arrive a bit early and we did overrun slightly. So we managed to get about 2 hours 20 in the wind tunnel. Before we dive into what runs we did, I'll just talk you through the setup of the runs. So we are testing at 40k an hour only. This is approximately the speed I will race at in Kona. It's the speed I've raced at this year in Texas and Hamburg. Obviously the Kona course is slightly different, but we've picked a speed that's relatively close to where we think I will be. You would normally test a range of speeds when you're if you are testing like what is faster as a product, or if you were one of these kit companies. But this was a very specific test in terms of I want to see what's faster for me in Kona, not a general kind of cover all bases, all types of courses. We also tested at 0, 3 and 8 degrees of yaw. So this is effectively straight on headwind and then a wind coming from a 3 and an 8 degree angle. Each time you are at one of those, the run lasts for 30 seconds. You have a countdown timer, so you're in position, you don't move, and it basically communicates to you and says, right, testing in 10, 9, 8. The clock then goes green and counts down from 30. You then feel the bike move slightly and the countdown starts again. You then feel the bike move slightly and the countdown starts again. So each run, in effect, takes about 2 minutes of time, in the sense that you do 0, 3, 8, and then back to 0. So there's 4 lots of 30 seconds, plus the time to move in between and set things up. So each run is about 3 to 5 minutes, depending on if you stay in position and sort of keep it all where it should be. So the point of testing for me was to, in my head, validate what I was doing, both from a positional point of view and some of the kit choices that I still had to make leading into the race. I certainly wasn't expecting necessarily to discover double-digit watts. That would be nice if that happened, but for me it was about validating what I'm doing, making some small tweaks and changes, and seeing if effectively the years of work I've put into both my position and investment I've made in various bits of kit based off advice from bike fitters and so forth was actually fast. We did some baseline runs, as you would expect. We had 3 suits to test, which I'll go into more detail on. I took 2 helmets, and there were multiple helmets there to choose from that are on the market if you wanted to test more. We tested calf guards, and lastly we did change the bottle position once, and that was effectively all we could do in the time. That said, we did about 15 plus runs in the 2 hours, which is a lot for that time. We were very efficient, we had things planned out. Let's start with the testing. The first thing we did was a baseline test, as you would expect. Now, in order to try and be somewhat fair, I took the suit that I wore in Kona in 2019, which at the time was my Clapham Chasers suit, as you'll see here. This is made by a company called Saddle Drunk. It does have some different materials in the sleeves and the body and the legs, but effectively was a relatively cheap club suit option. What I wanted to do was baseline my position in that suit. I haven't raced in it this year. And then the 2 main suits that I had a decision to make in terms of what would I wear in Kona, I could reference back to that. So we did all my baseline testing in the Clapham suit. We did a baseline test of a comfortable aero position. We then did one as aggressive as I could get. So holding the position, you know, your head tucked in, your shoulders scrunched for as tight as you could. And then we did a baseline position sat up on the hoods. Obviously, the aggressive position tested a bit faster. So I had a CDA average across the 3 angles, 0, 3 and 8 degrees that we did of 0.208. The baseline comfortable position was 0.214 and the baseline hoods position, as you would expect, is 0.283. Quite a big difference when you sat up on the hoods, but a marginal difference between being aggressive in a position that would not be sustainable for an Ironman, but maybe a 10-mile TT against a more relaxed, sat up, comfortable position that I have held somewhat in Ironmans and so forth. Before we went on to test any of the suits, I wanted to test some adjustment in my stack height. So I have had my front end pretty much slammed as far down to the base bar as you possibly could get for the 18 months or so I've been riding this bike. And what I wanted to do was test what would happen if I've lifted this up. Now I have recently made the front end wireless with SRAM blips, and Wattshop have brought out a spacer and plate that goes straight into the base bar of the Trek. So making this change was pretty quick and simple. However, what we did first was test the position with some foam. So we got 10 and 15 mil of foam, stuck it under my forearms, which would effectively lift me up. It did mean you wouldn't be in contact with the bars and wouldn't be perfect, but it would at least give us an indication of is this faster or equal to the baseline? And if it is, we'd then go ahead and make the change. We did find that effectively the CDA didn't really change. So although it wasn't necessarily faster, it was a position that potentially is more comfortable and therefore more sustainable. So we went ahead and made that change. We took the front end apart, popped in 15 mils of spacers and tightened everything back up. We then retested and did a baseline, and effectively we got a CDA of 0.215 and this baseline before was 0.214. So a very small change, arguably in a slower sense, but we're talking hundredths here. And therefore that was then the new baseline. I then got the next suit to test, which is a prototype suit from a company called Atoe, who I've been working with for custom kit for a little while. It is, I believe they're going to call it the Airborne X. There is 2 versions of this currently in prototype, one that fully unzips and one that zips 3/4 or a bit further down as this one is. Both have the sort of ribbed material that we're all seeing on the shoulders and back. Effectively, this suit is untested. They've never wind tunnel tested it. I think they've done some outdoor kind of velodrome type testing with some athletes down in Australia, but it's never been in a wind tunnel. So I was very fortunate that they gave me a suit. There are still some changes to make with some of the leg lengths, etc., but effectively a suit to test and trial. This suit tested 0.214 as its average CDA, so it came down slightly from the baseline of the Clapham, and so that's effectively, later on in the report, they tell me it's about 0.8 watts faster, which is effectively, in my book, you know, the same, which was quite surprising. I didn't notice at the time, we didn't go through the data during the testing, but effectively the suit tested marginally faster. I then put on, albeit not this one, my blue one is away being printed on, but I have here, this is actually a brand new one, a Fusion Tempo 1 suit. Fusion do a range of suits, this being the sort of fastest, most racer type one. They do one also that unzips, that has more pockets on it. This is the suit that we see a lot, both in the age group field and the pro field, and I've raced in this suit this year and quite like it. This suit then tested 0.216, so it went back up slightly. So in effect, what the test showed us was that the Airborne suit was marginally faster, the Clapham suit sat in the middle, and the Fusion suit was the slowest. Now I use inverted commas because I started to learn during the testing here was effectively how still you can stay is what determines the results. And by no means am I saying I moved around a lot wearing the Fusion suit. I believe I was quite a good test subject with how still I was staying, keeping your hands still, keeping your head in the same position for effectively 0.8 of a watt difference between the suits. in my book showed they were pretty much on par, and there isn't really a huge gain to be made in wearing any of them. And in fact, the decision for me would be more based on what suit potentially would I be cooler in, what storage do the suits offer, what are they comfy, what are the chamois like, etc. Ultimately to leading to a faster race. As the Atoe suit tested slightly faster, we put that one back on. Obviously in the process then to try and get my CDA somewhat as low as possible with some of the other things we were going to test. All those tests were done with a Casque Mistral helmet. We then put on the Met drone in a large, and so it's a wide body helmet, and I wear a size large. That again is the helmet since Texas and between Hamburg I switched to. So we put the Airborne suit on and had the Met drone. And we did see a drop in CDA there from when I had the Atoe suit on from 0.214 down to 0.213. So another marginal saving by wearing the Met drone over the Casque. As we then tested both the helmets I took, Philip went and got some more from the locker. And in the time that we were doing that, we managed to squeeze in a run, which we were very interested to do, which was to test some calf guards. Now, I've worn calf guards for years. I've worn no pins ones. I've been wearing the compressed sport ones a little bit this year so that I get compression as well as some aero gain. Now, Philip told me when we started that I'm very unlikely to see any gain. If not, they might make me slower calf guards, which I laughed at and thought there's no way that that's true. And he said he's never had an athlete test faster with calf guards. So I popped on the Fusion one. So I've never worn these racing, but Jamie kindly provided me a pair to test. The logic being, if they did provide a 5-watt gain, I would consider putting them on like we see some people do in T1 in Kona. So you're not allowed to wear them in the swim, but effectively I wanted to know, is it worth putting calf guards on? And the simple answer was no. I was marginally slower and the CDA went back to 0.214 with the Fusion calf guards. I won't be putting calf guards on in T1. It does surprise me, and if I had all the money in the world, I'd go and test every set of calf guards in the tunnel and find out if maybe they just don't suit me. We know that some people talk about the shapes of calves and some people are better without. It is worth noting that I did do a proper shave of my legs and arms going into the tunnel. I was testing against a pretty smooth bare leg and a calf guard. I'm fairly sure if you had significantly hairy legs, etc., that calf guards potentially would then show some of the gains that people talk about. For time purposes, we kept the calf guards on. So some of the footage you'll see now where we're now testing other helmets and finishing off some of the testing, to save time, because if I took the calf guards off, I'd then have to do another baseline test because we were going to change something else. So we then tested the HJC AdWatt helmet, which came out at 0.213. So the helmet came down in CDA and tested slightly faster on me than the Met drone. And then we tested the helmet that everybody likes to see, the POC Temper, which again tested marginally faster than the HJC and drone at 0.213. There is another decimal point here, it's 0.2130. The POC Temper in theory was the fastest helmet. From my perspective, even for the 3 minutes that the run lasts for and wearing the helmet, I found it uncomfortable, and the vision or where the little visor was, it was somewhat weird because you didn't actually look through the visor, or I didn't. It was almost looking at without a pair of glasses on as such. What I also know is, what I'm told, that helmet is brilliant in this sort of environment. But if you do move around a lot on the bike, etc., you can effectively negate the gains that it's given you. So for an Ironman, we do move around a bit, we do sit up, we do move our head as we get tired and fatigued. So therefore, I wouldn't consider wearing this helmet. We then did a quick test on what would happen if I extended my reach out. Now, we did this manually, similar to the foam, but effectively I moved my arms further up the pad and I put my hands beyond the grippers on the end of the poles to sort of test where that was, and that didn't test faster for myself. My CDA went back up to 0.2143, so not something to explore in terms of stretching me out in that respect. Lastly, then we did 2 final tests. So because I'm going to wear the Met drone, we put that back on. We had the Atoe suit on. We did keep the calf guards on, but we effectively went for the most aggressive position I can do and see how low the CDA would be. Now this did see quite a significant drop in my CDA, and it came out at 0.2074. But that position is what I would call my 10-mile time trial position. My chin was effectively right on the bottle in front of me. My shoulders were, although I felt like I was squeezing them in, they didn't move. You know, I don't have the ability to move my shoulders too much. I'm quite a broad person for my size, and yeah, would be somewhat unsustainable. And that was run 15 of the day. I would also say by then I was starting to feel a little bit fatigued from the testing and staying still, etc. We then managed to squeeze in one last run, which was run 16, and where we tested a double rear bottle. So all the testing at this point had been done with an X-Lab aero pouch on the back with a 1 litre bottle in it. That's what I've run for a couple of years now, both because it gives me the option to have a CO2 canister and a few tools out of the way, out of mind, and somewhat in an aero position, and I can have a 1 litre bottle on the back, and I've never lost a bottle from it. What I wanted to test, there is a mount that Trek do that bolts straight onto the Bontrager saddle. You can put 2 bottle cages on it. You are limited that the bottles sit upright. They don't kind of go at a nice angle at all. But effectively, I wanted to see if I could get 2 bottles back there, not because I thought it would give me make me faster, but similar to the position right at the start, if it came out very similar from a CDA perspective, then I've gained having an extra litre fluid on me, which could be beneficial in Kona. That was not faster, and we saw my CDA go back up to 0.214. Arguably, maybe a 1 litre bottles were too big. You can quite clearly see them sticking up quite a lot. You maybe want to put, if you had smaller bottles in there, it might have been better, but then it would effectively be the same as having 1 litre in the X-Lab setup. So they were the 16 runs we did. Some lessons that I learned from doing this wind tunnel. The first is it's actually quite hard, and I mean that both physically and sort of like how to stay in position. So you do have a screen in front of you that has an outline that you are trying to match with both your kind of body position and your head. So it gives you a guide to try and make the tests as fair as possible. I did struggle to see most of that due to the position I was in and where my hands were. I could only kind of see like an image to my right hand side out the corner of my eye. But effectively, it's not quite as simple as just jump on the bike and push 100 watts and just stay still. There is a bit more to it. I would, if you had time, for example, with the suits, you would like to do multiple runs to kind of get a better average of the CDAs for the suits, as well as potentially doing other speeds if you were really testing it. But effectively staying still, making sure that the process was as fair as possible and you were actually measuring gains or losses properly was way trickier than I thought it would be. Something that worked well that we did and was somewhat pre-planned. So I talked about basically having a clear plan. Now, some of this was put together by Philip. I sort of told him what I wanted to test, and we had an idea of what order we were going to do things in, but we even planned out spaces, for example, like having the tools available, how many spaces, all in one bag, ready to get into the tunnel. And that change at the front end took minutes rather than, I'm sure some of you have taken the front end of your TT bikes apart before and it's taken 20-30 minutes, which would be a complete waste of tunnel time. The other was when we did the bottle change, because I was fortunate enough that Amy's got the same bike as me, I was able to set the bottle cage mount up on the back of her saddle and just take it as a one-piece thing. It's the exact same saddle, and we were able to just undo one bolt, put a different saddle on and do it back up. So that test effectively, again, took a little bit less time than potentially if you were fanning around, putting the X-Lab mount off, putting the Trek one on, etc. So just planning those little details in before you go to the tunnel makes a huge difference, and we probably squeezed out 2 or 3 more runs than we would have been able to without that kind of planning. The other is, apart from sort of a nod or a thumbs up from Philip and the engineer that this is a bit faster and so forth, we didn't analyze or look at any of the data. I didn't know what the numbers necessarily were. Again, there are some numbers on the floor in front of you. You can kind of see a live CDA graph while you're riding, But ultimately, it makes no use to man nor beast or me at the time. I'm not trying, like if you try and make it better during the 30-second run, for example, you're just skewing the data. So it changes and it bounces around. But so I knew it was 0.2 something as an example, but you had no idea what the tenths and hundredths were. What am I going to do leading into Kona? So I am going to make some changes. The first thing we're going to do is keep the 15 mil spaces in. And for the next 6 weeks, I'm going to ride with that in and see how I feel, see if it is more comfortable. It may help or contribute hopefully to opening up my hip angle a little bit more, which will hopefully then translate to running better off the bike, which is something I've wanted to test and validate. So that's one thing we're going to change. I haven't made a decision yet on what suits I'm going to wear. I'm very lucky that both Atoe and Fusion or Multisport Online, they don't mind what I wear. So Atoe can make this suit in my custom optimal endurance colours. It will be tight in terms of getting it to Kona. I can't really make a decision until I'm given both suits, if you like, and I'm in Kona and I know and I've got ones that fit. TBC on that, but effectively in my mind there is no speed necessarily to be gained from either suit. It's basically what's comfier, what do I want to wear, what's got storage where I need it, what can I put ice and how do I cool myself down in the suit, etc. I am going to wear the Met drone helmet, so the casque is going to become a nice mantelpiece ornament. Obviously it's custom painted up with my Optimal Endurance logos, but I'm going to keep the Met drone helmet. Some changes we're going to make which were not necessarily tested. So I've got some 165 cranks on the way. So I've got 170s on the bike at the moment, but it wasn't the first time that someone has said to me you should explore that again for your hip angle. You may see yourself be a little bit more aerodynamic because you might be able to bring your saddle up a bit, which will flatten your back off, but effectively a comfort / power application perspective. If you put 165 cranks on, that might help. Apart from that, I can't change too much else. If you have any questions or want me to share a bit more or anything else, then please comment down below or reach out to me on Instagram in the DMs like lots of you do. But yeah, really fun experience. And that is it.